Hello friends, my name is Anshuman and welcome to our channel Knowledge Dhara. Today we are going to start class 9 physics chapter 4, that is flotation. So let's start. So let's start our chapter flotation. So let's start with the first topic. So our first topic is what is thrust. So let's start with the definition. The force acting on an object perpendicular to its surface is called thrust. Means the force acting perpendicular on a surface. Perpendicular. Perpendicular means like this. This is perpendicular. So perpendicular to a surface is called thrust. So some examples are given below. This is when we push a nail pin, then we use perpendicular or thrust force, and here is also an example of thrust force. So let's move ahead. Now next topic is what is pressure. So the definition is the thrust per unit area is called pressure. So the thrust per unit area is called pressure. We have discussed what is thrust. So the thrust per unit area is pressure. So pressure is denoted with P. Capital P, we have to remember it. Small p is momentum and capital P is pressure. So pressure is a vector quantity. Pressure is a vector quantity. SI unit of pressure is Pascal. It is on the name of a scientist, Pascal, and it is denoted with PA. So formula of pressure. Pressure is equals to thrust by area, or P is equals to F by A. As we have learned here, thrust per unit area. So thrust by area, or P is equals to F by A. So let's move ahead. So factors affecting the pressure. So factors affecting the pressure. So what are the factors that affect pressure? So the factors affecting pressure are: pressure is directly proportional to the thrust. Pressure is directly proportional to the thrust, as in the formula it is given, directly proportional to the thrust. This we have got by the formula only. So P directly proportional to F. Pressure is inversely proportional to the area of contact. Inversely proportional to the area means pressure is proportional to 1 by area, or pressure proportional to 1 by A, or we can also say like this: P inversely proportional to area. So let's move ahead. So our next topic is what are fluids. What are fluids? So any substance which can flow is called fluid. Means any substance which can flow is known as fluid. Basically fluids are mainly liquids and gases. In chemistry you have studied that fluids are liquid and gases. The water in ocean is an example of fluid. So this all water in ocean is fluid. So let's move ahead. So pressure exerted by fluids. So pressure exerted by fluids. So the pressure exerted by fluids in container is called its pressure exerted by fluid. So the pressure exerted by any fluid in its container is called the pressure exerted by the fluid. Means this is water and this is pressure that the water is giving on its container. These all pressure are done by water. So the fluids exert pressure on their container. So let's move ahead. So what is buoyant force? This is important topic, that what is buoyant force. So the upward perpendicular force of, or the thrust force acting on an object when immersed in a fluid is called buoyant force. Means the upward perpendicular force or upthrust force. What is upthrust force? Upward perpendicular force acting on an object when immersed in a fluid. Immersed in a fluid means when we put it in a fluid is called buoyant force. Means when every fluid gives an upward perpendicular force or upthrust force on an object in it, that force is called buoyant force. The ships, the boats, submarines are able to float because of buoyant force acting on them. So these ships and submarines are able to float because there is a upward thrust force acting on them, that is buoyant force. So let's move ahead. Now, factors affecting the buoyant force. So what are the factors that affect buoyant force? So the factors affecting the buoyant force are the volume of fluids in which the object is immersed. Means the volume of fluid is a factor which can affect buoyant force. The density of the fluid in which the object is immersed. Density of fluid is also needed. The acceleration due to gravity G. Acceleration due to gravity G is needed for buoyant force. Without acceleration due to gravity means the buoyant force opposes the acceleration due to gravity. So the buoyant force is inversely proportional to the temperature of the fluid in which the object is immersed. Buoyant force is inversely proportional means if the temperature is high, buoyant force will be low. If the temperature is low, then buoyant force will be high. So this was the factors that affect buoyant force. So let's move ahead. Now, Archimedes principle. This is based on buoyant force only. So now we have to study what is Archimedes principle. Archimedes was a Greek scientist who discovered this buoyant force. So the Archimedes principle states that when an object is immersed in a fluid, it experiences an buoyant force or up thrust equal to the weight displaced by the object. Means when an object is immersed in an fluid, then it experiences a buoyant force which is equal to the weight displaced by the object. So we can say that buoyant force is equals to weight of fluid displaced, or we know that weight is equals to mass into acceleration that we studied in previous chapter. So buoyant force is equals to mass into acceleration due to gravity, and mass formula is volume into density. So formula of mass is volume into density. So here buoyant force will become volume into density into G, or F is equals to V into D into G. So this is the formula of buoyant force. Remember this formula. So by this we got the formula of buoyant force, the Archimedes principle. So let's move ahead. Now, principle of flotation. So what is the principle of flotation? We have to study here. So the principle of flotation states that an object will float in a liquid if the weight of the liquid is displaced by the immersed part of the object is equal to the weight of the object. Means the principle of flotation states that an object will float in a liquid if the weight if it displaces a suitable weight or equal weight to its weight. Means an object will float when it displaces equal weight to its weight. The weight when an object is immersed in a liquid, two forces act on it. Weight of the object, this is first force which is downward, weight is downward force, and buoyant force of the liquid, this is upward force. So this was two forces which act on an object when immersed in liquid. So let's move ahead. Gases cases in the principle of flotation. So what are the cases in the principle of flotation? We have to study here this only. So three cases will arrive in the principle of flotation. Three cases for 1, 2, 3. So when the weight of the object is more than the buoyant force, that is W greater than F, then the body will sink in the liquid. If the buoyant force is less than the weight of an object, then the object will sink. When the weight of the object is equal to the buoyant force, that is weight is equals to buoyant force, then the object will float just below the surface of the liquid, means like this, just below the surface. When the weight of an object is less than the buoyant force, that is W lesser than F or F greater than W, then object will float in partially above the surface of the liquid. Means the then here partially above the surface of the liquid if weight is lesser than the buoyant force. This case is that case. So these were the cases in the principle of flotation. So let's move ahead. Now what is density? This is the main topic of this chapter. So the mass per unit volume is of an object is called its density. Mass per unit volume is called density. So density is denoted with small d. Density is denoted with small d. Sometimes we denote density with rho as well, but here we will denote with d only. Density is a vector quantity. SI unit of density is kg per meter cube. This is the SI unit of density. Formula of density. Density is equals to mass by volume, or D is equals to mass, or D is equals to M by V. So this was the formula of density. So let's move ahead. Role of density in flotation. So role of density in flotation. So the density brings three cases in flotation. If the density of a substance is more than the density of the liquid, then the object will sink in the liquid. If the density of substance is more than that of liquid, then it will sink in the fluid or liquid. If the density of an object is equal to that of the liquid, then the object will float under the surface of the liquid. If the density of object and liquid is equal, then the object will float partially beneath the surface of the liquid. If the density of an object is less than that of the liquid, then the object will float partially above the surface of the liquid. Partially above. So let's move ahead. Now, what is relative density? So the ratio of density of an substance to the density of water is called the relative density of the substance. Means the ratio of density of substance to the density of water is called relative density of the substance. So there is no unit of relative density, as it is the ratio of two similar quantities, because density by density, then there will be no SI unit or no unit of density. Formula of relative density. Relative density is equals to density by object by density of water. So this is the formula of relative density. Density of water is 1000 kg per meter cube, or 1 gram per centimeter cube. So this is the density of water. So let's move ahead. Now some relative densities with respect to water. So mercury has relative density 13, iron have 7.80, aluminium has 2.70, gas have 2.50, ice have 0.92, and wood have 8.80. So these were some relative density with respect to water. So here our chapter is completed. Now let's revise all formulae given in the chapter. So P is equals to F by A, this is pressure. F is equals to V into D into G, this is buoyant force. D is equals to M by V, this is density. And relative density is equals to density of substance by density of water, this is relative density. So here our chapter is completed. Thank you for watching, and for further chapters of physics, chemistry and biology, please subscribe our channel and keep watching our channel Vidya Dhara. Thank you.